Alright, so this is the machine that we're going to put the lift on. It's just stock suspension wise. Got 26-inch bighorns all the way around on 14-inch wheels. And everything else that would affect the lift kit is stock. Both sway bars are attached. My front shock preload adjustment is on the 3rd notch, and so is the rear. That's where I've been running it. So anyway, what I'm going to do now is just take my tape measure and try to get a measurement of where my suspension is sitting at, and obviously it's with no people in it and no gear really. So it's got around 1,100 miles on it now. People say these sag a little. I haven't measured it in a good while, so I can't say for sure. But what I'm going to do is just pick a few points to get measurements from, and try to show y'all what I'm getting, and we'll go from there with it. We'll put the lift on and see what changes. So now we're at the rear. I'm just going to pretty much measure right here to the bottom of this safety chain loop. If I can get the tape measure to cooperate. I'll just measure to the bottom of the hitch. It looks like it's going to be easiest. It looks like it's right at 9.5 exactly. So in the front, I'm going to measure right here, the bottom of the very front of the frame where the differential bolts up. This flat part is the lowest, so I'm going to measure it. I'm going to call that 10 15/16, so I almost have 11 inches right there at the very front. So now we're on the driver's side. I'm going to measure right to the bottom of the skid plate if I can. And it looks like it's right at 9 inches on the money. Alright, so here's the lift kit. There's the Perfex instructions and the part number. And I have verified that I have all my bolts and hardware. And these are my 2 rear brackets. And then these are the 4 front brackets. You use 2 on each side. So really that's all there is to it, just some spacers, bolts, nuts, and some little brackets. So I've verified everything is with the kit. So this is the only page of instructions. So it should be pretty simple. It's telling me to start at the front from what I can tell. So I'm going to go ahead and do the front first since that's what it's recommending, and we'll go from there. So the first thing I'm going to do is, since I'm removing this sway bar entirely, well, not the sway bar but the sway bar link, I'm just going to go ahead and remove this nut at the top. Now with the kit, if you're not messing with the sway bar, you're just going to leave this part alone. So the kit says the first thing that you need to do is remove this bottom shock bolt. So we're going to go ahead and do that for now. And it says discard the OEM bolts and nuts, but keep the OEM spacer and washer. Here's the washer, here's the spacer. That's the only way to loosen bolts. Okay, that's loose. Now we can move on to installing the lift brackets. So now that everything's apart, we'll go ahead and start to go back with this stuff. These brackets have a bevel. You can see they bevel out when you hold them this way, or in if you hold them that way. You want them where they're beveling out that way, because that way it clears the welds on the factory shock mount. So basically you're going to have one here, and it says to use a 65mm bolt and the big spacer provided with the kit. So this is the biggest spacer. If I can keep this shock out of the way. So the spacer fits down here and keeps the bolt from crushing your stock shock mount. I might have to peck that to get it lined up right. Okay, I just had to get a little pry bar to move this around some, because it's a snug fit in there. So now that that's lined up, I'll take my bracket, keep my bevel out. And there's that one. Now I'll take my other bracket, slide it on from this side, and the M10 lock nut, not one with the washer built onto it, so it's not a flange nut. So now, alright, so I told you wrong a second ago. This nut right here actually is a flange nut that needs to go on there. So I'm going to take that one off and just start a flange nut. And I was just reading the instructions and not looking at the picture, and the picture shows clearly which nut goes where. I was just reading, and I assumed since it didn't say flange nut that it went with just a regular nut, not a flange nut. So anyway, that's straightened out. We'll get on to the top part. So now what we have to do is start this, and we need a washer on each side of the shock, so let's see how smooth this goes. Try to line this washer up. Okay. So now this bolt is in. Now we put our factory spacer back on, and our sway bar end will go on. Then you'll use the factory washer and the provided nut that is not flanged. And you'll just tighten everything down that way. Now since I'm removing the front sway bar, I'm just going to go back with the factory bolt because it's a little shorter, and I'll use some spacers and just make up the gap, because I didn't buy any shorter bolts yet, but probably just replace them with shorter bolts at some time. But a bolt that's a little bit long won't hurt a thing with some spacers, so that's how I'm going to do it. So like I said, I'm just going to go back with the stock bolt in the upper mount because it's just a little shorter than the one provided with the kit. The one with the kit is longer because these brackets obviously increase the thickness here, so in order to get your factory sway bar link back on, it has to be just a little longer. But I'm just going back with factory bolt and nut and washer, and I just made a spacer out of the brake caliper slide. I just cut a little length off about what I need, and I'm going to tighten it up so I get the right size socket. Okay, everything's good and snug there. My spacer's pretty square, it looks good. And this side is done. That's all there is to the front. I'm going to do the other side off camera just to speed the process up. And it's just going to be the exact same thing. So there's this side, I'm going to move on to the other. So now we're on to the back. I'm going to assume most people know how to do this already, but you just basically, we got to get the air box out, so just going to remove this cover. And I did wash it, but I had my toolbox sitting here in the bed, so all the mud went up under it and sitting right there. So now that that cover's off, we just need a flathead screwdriver. This is the intake pipe that goes over to the side right behind the driver's seat. Make sure it's loose enough. Okay, that's out of the way. Now we'll take our clamp off down here that holds our intake to the throttle body. And our air box should release with a little work. Oh, there's an electrical connector holder on the side. Now it's loose, so there's the air box. Just be sure and don't wash a bunch of dirt up in your intake. Might even clean it out a little before you put it back together, because it's pretty easy to get dirt up in there. And one thing I'm going to mention right now is when you put the air box back in, be for sure that the boot on the air box seats correctly on the throttle body. I put mine back in before, and the boot caught the lip of the throttle body and rolled up on the bottom side. It looked good on the top, and it seated up on there pretty well. But whenever I went to check it out a little better, after I started having issues, it had rolled up on the bottom and left a gap, and it had been sucking dirt right there. So just be very mindful of that and save yourself the trouble that I went through putting the top end on. So now this is out of the way, so we'll see what the instructions say next. So this time the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and get a 15mm and remove the top of the sway bar link so that it's free and we can work with it. I'm not going to show the whole process. So now we've got to take the top shock mounting bolt out. I've already broke it loose and it was a lot tighter than I expected, but I'm going to take it out now. Alright. Now I gotta try to get the bolt out. Alright, there we go, that one's loose. So on the back side of this new bracket, right here, there's a hole that you're going to have to drill. It's through the factory shock mount, and basically it just helps to stiffen this up. So it says to take this bracket, and now these are directional. One is made for the left side and one's made for the right. They won't fit the other way. So you slide this over top of here and put the factory bolt back in it, and that ensures that it's lined up. So now I'll go back around to the back side and mark my pilot hole, and I'll go ahead and drill that hole, and then there's a small bolt that goes in there, and you can kind of see how the rest of it's going to line up. The shock's going to go right in here with a bolt. So I'm going to go ahead and try to work on. So now I'm going to try to use my little spring-loaded center punch and use this mark that I made and try my best to center up the hole and put a divot in it. So that I can drill a pilot hole and then step up to 5/16, which is what the final size of the hole needs to be. So there's my mark. Now I'm going to try to drill my pilot hole. This is a 3/16, but it doesn't matter what you use. They just recommend you start out with a smaller hole than what you're going to end up with. So. There's that. So now I'm going to step up to my 5/16 bit. So now we're going to see if the hole I drilled lined up and if the bracket and everything fits properly. Believe it or not, it looks like it's going to work. So it says go ahead and install this 8mm bolt, which is on the back side, and then I've got an 8mm bolt or 8mm nut that goes on the other side inside here. Now the other side is going to be a little easier because the exhaust is not in your way. That's one reason I videoed this side, because it's definitely going to be the more troublesome of the two, or it should be. Alright, that one should be tight. Now if everything was done correctly, I should be able to take this spacer and put it in here, and run this bolt through it and put this flange nut on the back side. And believe it or not, I think we might have got it the first go here without drilling 3 different holes. They really don't need to be superhuman tight. I'm pretty bad about over tightening bolts, but you just want them good and snug because they've got lock nuts. They're not going to back off. So basically, you just get them good and snug where they won't move around, and that's good enough. So now this part is probably what most people complain about having trouble with. I'll find out right now how much trouble it actually is. So the instructions say put the small spacers on top of the sway bar. So this right here, mine's kind of cruddy. So then it looks like you're going to put this back on. Now it says you're going to have some patience putting the sway bar back together because you've got to put the rubber back on top. And I'm going to try to do it kind of back how it was so maybe it fits the best. It definitely looks like it's not going to want to go just fall together, so I've got a little bit of an idea of what might work for me. Let my jack down slowly, and I'm hoping it'll push the link up into the arm some. It's looking like it did, so you can see now I've got enough to get the nut started again, at least I think. It's going to be close. And it says you can use a ratchet strap and hold this sway bar down to the suspension arm. And I may still have to do that, but right now I'm just trying to see. It looks like I should have enough to get it started. It's really close. Okay, so I got it started. So I've got the nut tightened down where there's a few threads showing at the top, and it's kind of compressing all this rubber, but that's to be expected. So anyway, we're done on the rear now. So there's the sway bar reconnected, and here is the bracket that we put on. You can see the little bolt up inside of there. And if we go to the back side, you can see the bracket back here and the bolt right there. Pretty simple, just takes a few minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this camera off and finish the other side, and then we'll pull it back out and we'll take our ground clearance measurements again, and we'll see what kind of difference we have. Alright, so now we're going to take our rear measurement again. This is after the lift kit. So the measurement that I had before was right at 9.5 inches in the rear. That's to the bottom of the hitch here. And I tried to park it pretty close to the same spot on the driveway. So you can see now I'd pretty much call that 11.25. So now we're going to go to the front here. Set my camera up. We'll try to get a measurement on the suspension heights up here. And I measured right here before, and the measurement was 10 15/16. So pretty much say about 11 inches. Let me take a new reading. And looks like we've got 12 3/4 inches. That's actually a little more than I figured. You can see that. So that's we were at 10 15/16, so almost 11. So now we're at 12 3/4. So I guess really that's maybe just a smidge over 1 3/4 inches that we gained in the front. So seems pretty consistent, 1 3/4 that we've gained in height in the front and the rear. So we'll go ahead and check the side now and see what we've got there. I assume it'll be pretty much similar results since it's the same front to back. So now we'll take our center reading. Try to get pretty close to where I took the reading from before. Try to get my camera set up so you can see it. So I measured right to the bottom of the skid plate, and it looks like it's at 11.25 inches. It was 9 inches. So if we've got 11.25, that's actually going to be 2.25 inches. So, and it may not be sitting perfectly level. So I'm going to say it's probably an average of right around 1 3/4 to 2 inches. So alright, so here's the machine after the lift kit's installed, and I probably should have taken some better video of it beforehand, but you can see it's it's kind of off the ground a little bit now. It's definitely got a little clearance underneath, and the fender wells have a lot more room. Probably could run some bigger tires now if I wanted to. So those are 26-inch bighorns on 14-inch no limit wheels, and overall really happy with how the kit went together. It was easy to install. Instructions were pretty simple. It's definitely got my razor standing up a lot better, and mostly any issues I ever had going anywhere were ground clearance related. So I'm really hoping that this makes a pretty big difference, and I think it will. So definitely happy with it for the money. It's one of the cheaper kits, but I like the way that it's made. It just I especially like the brackets in the rear. That's one thing. These brackets are okay, but the rear brackets move the shocks out some, which helps them better handle the load, and the rear is the heaviest because the engine's back there. So I think that's a good thing in the rear. In the front, I'm not sure it's quite as important. There are a few different lift kits to choose from on these things, but for the cost and the way it's built, I do like this kit. Just as initial impressions. Like I said, I've not been on the trail yet with it, but I'm kind of excited to go try it out now, because I'm thinking this thing's going to go a lot better, especially in the mud. The problem before was it just sit low enough that the skid plate would just drag in the mud. When you've got a 4-foot wide skid plate that's, I don't know, 8 feet long, even if you just say 6 feet long and just lay it in the mud, it's hard to pull, So if I can just keep the bottom of the skid off the mud a little bit and get my tires on down into the ruts, that'll help it pull through a lot better. So definitely excited to try it out a little bit. And like I said, I also got rid of the front sway bar, and I'm thinking that's going to help it quite a bit. I did the articulation test, and hopefully you can see a little difference in that in the video. But this is the sway bar. I left the sway bar itself in, and I just zip tied it to this support up here so that it can't flop around. But one thing that was surprising to me is I have some squeaking sometimes in my suspension, and I think a lot of it is that front sway bar, because it was really pretty hard to turn it by hand, and it should move pretty freely if you ask me. You can see the grease on it there. I grease it about every second ride, and I figured it would be decent, but I'm thinking that the grease is just coming out in one spot, not really going all the way around the rod, which causes it not to be that free moving. So I think that's going to make a difference in the front suspension travel. So looking forward to trying that out. Anyway, appreciate you guys watching, and hopefully the video was informative. And if you have any questions, just feel free to let me know. It probably took me 2.5 to 3 hours to install the kit, even taking video, which takes quite a bit longer for me. So anyway, like I said, hope you enjoyed it, and